Hey there, folks. This is Misadventure here for the 6th developer diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. This may be a slightly shorter dev diary as I only have one region to show you all and it's not fully complete, although everything substantive is done. I've not adjusted the nation colors or the flag designs as that would take a long time with the sheer density of this region. But everything in terms of border layouts, roads, and all the substantive stuff is in its correct place, and all the localization is done as well. So all the important stuff is done, and I will work on the aesthetic stuff later on once I have some more time. But also in this dev diary, I have some system-level changes to show you all, and I want to get some feedback on them in the comments down below, as these are going to be changes that if you're an experienced Imperator and veteran like me, you're going to notice them because these are both UI changes, which I hope will improve the experience of the mod, but I want to get people's feedback, as any UI changes can really feel kind of wrong for some folks. I don't want to just throw these in here and not talk about them in a dev diary. So that's why this dev diary is a bit shorter. I'm going to sort of split it between talking about the new region that I worked on and these changes. So let me just hop into a thin eye here, and we'll start taking a look at everything. So first things first, let me hop over to the region map mode. Here is the Arcadia region at the center of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It's kind of a small region, but it is definitely not a barren region. This is a very densely packed region with a lot of different city-states crammed together into this one area. Now, fortunately for my sanity, the political situation in Arcadia is not very complicated. Everyone in the region is in the Peloponnesian League. There's no city-states here at all that are not in the Peloponnesian League according to Thucydides and our other sources. So, fortunately, in terms of the situation here, the political situation, everyone is on board with Lacedaemon. There's no defectors in 431, which makes just organizing the layout and thinking about the balance for that way easier, so that's good. But I will talk more about the situation in Arcadia and the dynamics between the different city-states later. I first want to talk about these system-level changes. So let me just scroll out here to maximum zoom. So the first change has to do with zoom level. And without getting too technical and getting into the way things are coded, basically in this game, zooming in and out works on an integer system, not a gradient system. Which is to say, every sort of press of my mouse wheel or scroll of my mouse wheel results in a movement along a series of set integer numbers by 1 up or down. So I'm the most zoomed out I can be right now. Scrolling up does nothing. You can maybe hear it. But if I were to scroll in, one press of the scroll wheel moves me by 1 integer. Now, every time I zoom out and in, I'm going the same exact amount of zoom distance in and out because it's not a gradient, right? I'm not, it's not like a fluid movement where each time you redo it, there's a slight change in your position. It's a flat integer that you're changing between. So if you look closely at, like, for example, the layout of what's on the screen, every time I finish zooming in, I go back to the exact same position because I'm not moving around the camera. Zooming in and out on this integer system, it's the exact same zoom level each time. Now, what's convenient about this for coding purposes is that these flat specific integers can have sort of can be used as variables for the appearance and the disappearance of different UI elements. So the way it works in the code is that every UI element, or really many UI elements, have a zoom level. I don't remember the exact term in the code. It's basically like a zoom integer minimum and a zoom integer maximum. So if your current zoom integer is below the minimum or above the maximum, the UI element does not display. If it's at or above or at or below the minimum and maximum respectively, the UI element does display. So because of this, as an example, here at this most zoomed out point in the Bronze Age mod, this is a Bronze Age mod specific thing, we're looking at what for the Bronze Age is called the flat map, which is I think also a system in the vanilla game, but it has a different appearance. But in Bronze Age, the flat map has this kind of beige color scheme around the borders of the map, and the ocean gets this overlay that has some additional text on it and a different color scheme. So when you zoom in a couple of integers, the flat map disappears and you see the white clouds overlaid over the out of play area, and the ocean gets its normal texture. Also, some UI elements like fleets start to appear once you're outside of the flat map range, although the fleet also appears a bit early. So I'm continually tweaking all of the numbers for things like fleets. I actually am having trouble finding in the code where the fleet banner appearing is controlled, so I need to work on that later. But the point is, different UI elements appear at different zoom levels, and it's all flat integer numbers that are easy to work with for coding purposes. So what I've done is I've adjusted how a couple different UI elements, for this first change that I'm talking about of the two, what I've done is I've adjusted how several UI elements appear at different zoom levels. And what I've done here is with the goal, right? I'm making all these changes as part of my broader goal for the project of encouraging a play style for the average player more zoomed in than what you would normally do on the Bronze Age map. That's the main goal that I have. Normally, and you may have seen it earlier in the previous dev diaries, on the Bronze Age map with the Bronze Age default zoom levels, you have to be fairly far zoomed out for a map that would only be the Greek area, right? Probably, in order for the tile names and the other UI elements at that lower zoom level to become replaced by the country names, if that makes sense. And without a side-by-side comparison, it's kind of hard to show you in a minute here what I mean by that, but if we just sort of pay attention here, as I zoom into it, let me just zoom in a bit closer. I think around here is when in the Bronze Age normally the tile names would become displayed and the other iconography would become displayed, like forts and provincial capitals and whatnot. But as you can see, the country name continues to be displayed at this zoom level, and at this one as well. I think the next one is when the stuff becomes displayed. Here it goes, yeah. So as you can see here, at this zoom level showing the country names is not possible in the vanilla game or in Bronze Age. But it is now how it's going to work in this mod, because this should feel zoomed out for this map, right? That's kind of like my thinking here. Now, obviously, I'm not working with a different Greek map than this one. I'm not working with one that's even more sort of zoomed in terms of the tile density. I would love to be able to do that, but that's not what I have available. So what I have to do is trick your brain into thinking the map is bigger than it is by having the country names displayed in. For any Paradox player ever, including me, seeing the country names appear on your UI is a kind of mental shorthand of I'm zoomed out. I'm looking at a zoomed out version of the map. You're going to start to think of this zoom level as zoomed out, which helps you then not notice that the actual territory when you're more zoomed in isn't as spacious as it would be with a map that was more sort of micro and detailed. So that's one change that I've made. Another change along this kind of another change in this with this mindset in mind is I've made a change to how fort and other icon and provincial capital and other icons appear at different zoom levels. So forts and provincial capitals and your main capital all appear at this new zoom level when the tile names appear. But something that I've changed is port icons also appear at that level and not above that level. Now, normally in Imperator Rome, port icons continue being visible way more zoomed out. You can zoom out and there's port icons all over the place. Now, one might argue, when you're talking about port icons, and the thinking in the vanilla coding was probably when you're dealing with navies, navies move quite a big distance, the sea tiles are quite large, so it's only fair, right, given the large sea tiles, to have the port icons be visible further away. But again, even at this zoom level, like, you can still zoom out and still like move around navies just fine, and you can still click them into ports, right? You can still just click on the tile. You don't need the port icon to guide you, and these Greek port designs that I'm using for the mod are honestly pretty visible with their distinctive circular shape. I don't think you're going to have a lot of trouble thinking, oh, is there a port here? Oh, I don't know if there's a port here. I can't tell, like, at this zoom level. Like, you can probably tell even more zoomed out, right? Because, for example, as you start to zoom out, you can barely tell probably on YouTube, but the actual graphic of the port starts to de-render, but the birds over the port stay there. In this mod, in Bronze Age, there are flocks of birds over all port possible locations. So even zoomed out really far like this, which is not a zoom level anyone should be playing this mod on Hegemony on anyways, even if you zoom in a bit like this, at this point you can see the ports. So there's like an edge case scenario I can envision where someone who plays this game as zoomed out as possible is mad that I've removed the port iconography from this zoom level. But for the average person, most play will happen at this level, right? At this zoom level and closer. So I think this is a worthwhile trade-off. With UI design, there's no correct way to do it. It's always about trade-offs. And I think this is a good trade-off for the level of zoom I anticipate people will play this mod at, given that the world space that will be the focus of this mod, or the entirety of this mod, is really just sort of, like this area here. There's no need to be playing it like this level regularly for most reasons, right? You can always zoom out to get a lay of the land just fine, but you're going to be playing and doing actions more zoomed in like this. So that's a change that I made there. And again, I want feedback in the comments about this because I'm talking to the audience of people that are probably going to be the most, interested people playing this mod once it's out and like released, and also possibly as playtesters. So definitely your feedback on this design change is appreciated. Another change I've made, which is a bit more subtle, but you may have noticed it if you're keen-eyed, is I've also made a change to the layering of different UI elements on top of each other. Now this one is more something I'm open to making more tweaks on, as there are some changes that are unintentional from this, but the main thing that I've done with this change that I have intended is that both the tile names and the country names overlay on top of models on the map. So it's a bit hard to explain what I mean by that. If you go back and you look at previous dev diaries or any Imperator Rome footage made by anybody who's playing with vanilla settings for this stuff, most mods would not touch this either probably. But normally, for example, the word Athenae, the A and the H would be underneath the graphic of the forts beneath it, right, for the country name, and also for the place name. For example, the Athenae tile, the name is now displayed on top of the fort, not below it. Now, if you start to actually rotate the camera, you start to notice a weird optical illusion, because what's happening here is the name is layered on top of, this isn't what's going on in the code, but the best way to explain it kind of conceptually is I'm layering the name on top of these other elements, in this case the model, but what's actually happening is the name transparently appears through all models above it, right? If you look closely, the fort model and the buildings are still a 3D model, but the name projects through it as if it weren't there, which is a bit of a weird, trippy effect if you look too close. Now, most of the time, you're not going to really be looking that closely at something like that, and the goal with this change is pure readability. And this is a change I may even implement in my own Imperator Rome, vanilla, code for whenever I play the game, because this is a change that I like anyways. And because now the names of these places isn't obscured by the models on top of them, you're able to look at a tile and way more easily and consistently say, oh, that's Athenae, right? Or, oh, that's like Avalon or whatever, like any tile that is like, or Eritrea, right? Like the Eritrea tile, like the R and the T are both, or the R and the E are both covered up by the fort normally, so you're like, what is this Eritrea? Like what? You have to mouse over it to see. So anything where your eyes can do the work that a mouse over used to be needed to do is an improvement, I think, to the UI. So again, this is a pretty big change to something pretty specific, but if you're paying attention and you'd like to, for example, start moving the camera around, this effect starts to get pretty trippy the more you look at it. For example, the names of places are going to appear, for example, through level geometry. So it's a bit hard to show you. Let me find a really tall mountain to show you. Pay attention to, for example, the Kalinoi tile, right? As I move my... Actually, that's not a very good example. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go, yeah. So pay attention to Myra as I scroll my camera around. You can actually still see the letters through the trees and the land of the mountain, because this mountain geometry is... the letters are appearing transparently through it. The circumstances where this will come up in a way that is a problem for most people are extremely uncommon, right? Most people don't even like scroll the camera around or turn the camera around like this anyways, right? Because this is so cumbersome in this engine. Most people play at the default kind of rotation, and they don't really rotate the camera manually under most circumstances. So because the circumstances where this new way that things are displayed is trippy and weird are so specific and so uncommon, I think this is a good trade-off, because the result of this is much more readability on the map. And I really, really like being able to just see the names more clearly, especially because with this game, a lot of the names are going to display at odd angles and are going to be kind of hard to read. Not that they're easy to read anyways, but it does improve things. The main thing about this that I wanted is the country names to display over all the models. That's the main reason I wanted to make this change, but the tile names displaying more clearly is a nice side effect. Now, something that's not a nice side effect is that on top of the names appearing above other things like geometry and models, the border lines between different tiles and of other kinds also appear over models. So, for example, the border lines, and this is a bit more visible, appear transparently through trees, which didn't happen before. Now, this is a pretty minor issue, and you're only going to notice it if you look for it closely. But another example is that, something that's a bit more obvious, is that bridges are now transparent as to the border underneath them. previously bridges nicely crossed over the borders and blocked out the border sort of render. And so the pathways were much more uninterrupted. I think roads also did this. I'm not sure about roads. Bridges definitely did. So again, if you're looking closely, it starts to, like, the cracks start to appear in this transparency thing. However, if I can find a way to make bridges specifically, once again, overlay on top of the borders, I'll do that. But I can't figure out how to do that without undoing this whole change. So the trade-off of having the country names and the tile names appear overlaid, or really transparently through, but it looks like an overlay, over models is worth it for these very minor sort of downgrades. So hopefully that's an understandable trade-off. But again, the reason I'm mentioning it in this dev diary is to get feedback. I want to hear what people think about this and about whether you think this makes the map more readable. That's the main goal here, ultimately. I feel like already I can just read this map much more clearly just looking around. And anything that limits the need to actually scroll over to look with your tooltip is, I think, a great change to this UI. It's not like I've said the Imperator UI is already perfect. I've constantly complained about this game's UI for years, so yeah, I'm just being consistent at least. But those are the two system-level changes that I've made. A lot of my work before this dev diary was on these changes, so that's also why I haven't done other regions beyond the Arcadia region. But speaking of which, let's talk about Arcadia. And by the way, as well, with these changes, both the country names and also things like region names will appear at that same level. I think province names do as well. Yeah, so all the different map modes have been adjusted dynamically by these changes, so just a heads up about that. But this will make showing off the names of provinces way easier, because I don't have to be so zoomed out to show them. So that's going to be one nice thing for these dev diaries. So in Arcadia, we've got ourselves 4 regions. Up in the north, we've got, how do you even say this? Vareo Ditica Arcadia, which means Northwest Arcadia, because this is such a catch-all area with so many different tags crammed together, it wouldn't really be possible to just name it one thing. Over here we have the small Arcobenos Kai Mantinea province, which includes the territory of, obviously, the city-states of Arcobenos and Mantinea. By the way, this is the infamous other Arcobenos. If you remember, there's an Arcobenos up here in Beatia, and this was sometimes called Arcobenos Arcadia to distinguish it because the Beatian one was more important. I think it's probably fine to have these two nations just share the same name, both in terms of the tile and the country. There might even be, if I can do some sort of achievement system, which would be kind of fun, there might even be an achievement for like doing a co-op game with the two Arcobenoses teamed up. They're both in the Peloponnesian League for what it's worth, so it would be doable from the start. So that could be kind of a fun co-op challenge experience. The two double tile city-state Arcobenos nations teamed up together. That could be kind of funny. But anyways, back over to the provinces. Then we've got Tegeatus, which is the domain of the powerful Tegea city-state, which is the strongest nation in Arcadia in this time period, and I will get back to some of the sort of explanation of the dynamics in Arcadia because they are quite complicated. And then lastly, we have got the Mainalia province, which is again kind of this catch-all province with 3 different city-states there. So Arcadia is very diverse, and it's very kind of politically splintered, but it's not very politically diverse, to sort of combine those two comments together, because in 431 BCE, when the mod begins, all of the Arcadians are all in the Peloponnesian League. There's no sort of like dissent about this. All the historians agree, Thucydides agrees. These guys were all on board. In fact, Arcadia is one of the most established Peloponnesian League member areas in the entire Greek world. The Peloponnesian League began with an alliance between Lacedaemon and Tegea. This alliance is the origin of the Peloponnesian League. And so Tegea counts itself as the oldest member of the League and a very, very firm ally of Lacedaemon, who, as you might imagine, they had in the past had some border conflict with. But they basically, after one of their wars a couple decades ago, I think it may have been a couple hundred years ago, it may have been in the 500s, I don't remember offhand, but after a border war, the two signed a peace treaty that formed an alliance. I mean, if you're going to make peace, may as well go all the way, I guess. And this alliance is the foundation of what becomes the Peloponnesian League later on. So in order to sort of talk about the dynamics of the region, I first want to note that These Titani and Sikyan tags, these are leftovers from Bronze Age. I've not adjusted these yet. I did plunder all the other tags, including some from northern Greece, to get all the tags I need for Arcadia, but these two over here are not designed yet, so just ignore everything that's in what will become the Achaia region later on. So remember, the Arcadia region ends up here, so just ignore the stuff over here that's not been adjusted yet. But in Arcadia, the Tegea nation has its, the road into Arcadia from the west, which is over from the Therea area, goes into Tegea. Tegea also controls all the borders with the Laconia region directly, which is historically accurate. The city-state of Phegalia controls the border with Messenia. And then over in the east, it's a bit more complicated with a kind of giant convoluted crossroads going on. But ultimately, both Elis, really the Olympia area, and Lepreon have their borders, which is to say, obviously Elis, because Lepreon's going to be a vassal of Elis. But either way, they have their borders both with the Alifera city-state and the Harea city-state. And then heading north, how the Achaia region is connected, I'm still working on that. Probably, did I forget to localize? Oh, god damn it, I forgot to localize Kanatha. This nation should be called Kanatha, but I'll do that after this dev diary. Kanatha will be the main crossroads up in the north, and also Theneos as well, both going northward to what will probably still be called Agira, and then over here, possibly even connecting up with Argos from the west. So those are the kind of external borders. Let's talk about the internal borders. So in this province, as you might be able to guess, the strongest nation is Tegea, although not necessarily by as much as you may think. According to all the historical accounts and historians today, this was really a region with three sort of co-equal, powerful, influential city-states, with Tegea probably being the strongest, and in this mod I've just decided to make them the strongest and give them their own province, just also for kind of territorial reasons, as the way this is laid out, I kind of had to do it like this. But either way, Tegea controlling the entire border with Laconia directly is historically accurate, so it works out fine. But anyways, the three city-states that were the strongest in this region was Tegea, Mantinea, and Orchomenos, or Orchomenos Arcadia, according to some, with the rest of the region really being quite splintered between a bunch of different towns and cities. Now, one city from this area that you may be wondering where is Megalopolis. Now, if you've played regular Imperator Rome or other sort of ancient age strategy games, you may recognize the famous city of Megalopolis as needing to be kind of like around here. Now, where is Megalopolis? It's not been built yet. I actually didn't know this until I did this research for this region. Megalopolis was built by the Arcadian League, which was formed after the Peloponnesian War as a result of geopolitical stuff happening about 50 years or so later than when the game begins, than when the mod begins, rather. So Megalopolis will eventually be built kind of in this area, but it's not built yet, and it's not going to be built during the Peloponnesian War, at least not historically. So all of the territory that eventually gets sort of merged into Megalopolis is at this point held by Tegea. These are all just very small villages without much population. Tegea as a city-state is the strongest in the region. I'd say that it's a comparable power level probably to a nation like Megara, so it's kind of, in terms of the power ranking, it's stronger than just a single city-state. For example, let's compare it to Alifera or, I don't know, Clytor. These are like weak individual city-states that basically don't have enough power to do a lot of stuff on their own. Compared to a nation of similar size and similar population like Megara, it is definitely kind of like a mid-level power. But then compared to, for example, Argos or Corinthos, which are similar sizes but are much more populous, it is nowhere near the strength. Also, Corinthos and Argos both have strong navies, especially Corinthos. Tegea, another example is Elis, is more kind of on that higher level power level. I should probably come up with a ranking system, honestly, to kind of explain this better. Basically, if rank 5 are the superpowers of this world, of the Greek world, for example, Atenae and Lacedaemon, rank 4 are major powers that are not currently hegemons but have a strong chance to become those. For example, Elis, Corinthos, Thebae, especially if they organize the Batian League. These would be sort of rank 4. Rank 3 are strong but not necessarily in the conversation for hegemon. So I guess these would be like, it's a good example of rank 3. Maybe like Delphi might be rank 3, given its sort of influence. Lamia might be. Tegea might be rank 3. Actually, I'd say Tegea is probably rank 3 as an example. And Megara is probably also rank 3. Rank 2 are kind of like, I guess I'd say rank 2 are, weaker but still self-sufficient city-states. So, for example, Clytor, Alfiera, I don't know, the Beatine members might be rank 2. Rank 1 are weak and, like, weakened city-states. So, like, Aegina, which was already at this stage, although not directly colonized by Athenae, it had lost to Athenae in a previous war, so it is weakened. Lepreon as a vassal is weakened and whatnot. Delphi would be in this position if they didn't have the power level of their sort of religious situation. So that's kind of what's going on with, and again, this is like just spur of the moment way of phrasing this, but the point is, don't look at the size of the nation to determine power level. Athenae does not look like a large nation, but it's one of the strongest nations on this map, or what will be this map. Obviously, Lacedaemon looks strong and is strong, but they are not stronger than Athenae in just a direct way because of their size, right? You have to look at other statistics that aren't really displayed in the map facially. So, for example, Tegea, which is of a similar size to Argos, is not on the same power level of Argos, but it is stronger than, for example, Lepreon, who they have a similar size to. So that's why all this context and all these sort of reasons for different strength levels need so much explanation, not just the size of the nation. So, having said all that, within Arcadia, Tegea is the strongest city-state, but Mantinea and Archomenos are both also quite strong and influential. And then there's this giant network of other city-states that are all kind of similar power level. Some of them have 2 tiles, some of them have 1 tile. They're all basically the same power level. And if all of them teamed up together and oppose the other 3, I'd say that they definitely have an advantage, but not by a lot. However, that's not really needed to be worried about, because at this point in 431 BCE, everybody in Arcadia is all completely on board with the Peloponnesian League. There's no sort of like Plataean defection situation going on. This is deep Peloponnesian League country, and everyone is on board with Lacedaemon. Now, I do envision some mission trees where, for example, playing as Tegea, you're patched up, but still in memory, conflicts with Lacedaemon could be resurfaced if you wanted to play out kind of a alt history as a anti-Lacedaemon Tegea, but you'd use your status as the oldest Peloponnesian League member as a way to kind of sort of explore your options for revenge with kind of a subterfuge angle. So that's like one way the Tegea mission tree could be organized. Other ones like Archomenos and Mantinea could be about trying to supplant Tegea as the de facto hegemon of the region. Now, unlike the Boeotia region with its organized Boeotian League, in Arcadia, although these nations are all culturally very close together and they're all in the same league, like Boeotia, they're not in a formal league with each other. The Arcadian League is formed after the period of this mod, so they do eventually do that, and then they build Megalopolis over here when they do that, but they're not at this position yet, so they are all independent from each other, although they do look to Tegea as their kind of de facto leader, truly a de facto leader for their region. But ultimately, they look to Lacedaemon as their actual leader for their league. So the lack of internal conflict in the region means that a lot of the sort of gameplay in playing as one of these city-states is going to be about kind of diplomatic maneuvering and sending your army off to do Peloponnesian army stuff kind of abroad without really having a lot of direct expansion happening internally. Now, for example, something that could bring a bit more excitement to Arcadia, given that everyone's kind of on the same team, is this question of Argos being neutral, right? If Lacedaemon declares, you know what, we're done messing around with dealing with Argos, we're going to just attack them, then suddenly there's a powerful opponent nearby that you can kind of gather your forces to go and fight. Or if like Elis decides to turn coat and leave the league or something like that, or if Lacedaemon has Helot rebellions, you're in a good position to be called over to come help them out. So definitely there can still be a lot of like gameplay happening even for a completely landlocked kind of relatively low power city-state. Even a nation like Tegea is kind of in that position. But this is true in regular Imperator Rome as well. The main difference with this mod is that these relationships are already pre-set up when the game begins. In regular Imperator Rome, there are some existing alliances that are historical, but this mod is mostly focused on having a historically accurate starting situation, not the kind of more blank slate situation that regular Imperator Rome tries to go for. And I think that as someone that personally prefers playing with that kind of blank slate design, it's really interesting to make this mod and kind of conceptualize how gameplay will work without that blank slate situation. This is very much a pre-set up, sort of pre-organized world, and many things that you would do in a more of a blank slate situation, like building your own roads, turning places into cities, those are things that may not even be part of the mod because there's no need for them to be, because the time scale of the mod would not really make sense for doing giant like nation building beyond just conquering territory and some other, like adjusting like buildings and cities and whatnot. That's totally fine, but I'm still figuring out exactly how to implement some of these features in this mod in order for it to work for the theme that I'm going for. So that's the basic situation in Arcadia. Not as much kind of to really say about the specific personalities and situations of these different city-states, as Tegea is the strongest, and they have a history of conflict with Lacedaemon and a border with them, but they're currently on good terms and have been for a long time. And their interest might be to diplomatically annex Arcadia into their direct control, which some of these city-states played with the AI might be okay with ultimately, because they would just fall under direct to game supervision. But stopping them from doing that is the similar goals of Mantinea and Orchomenos, who also are in a good position to spread their influence and do something similar. And if I remember correctly, Mantinea and Orchomenos also had conflict. I guess it's probably fair to say, if I don't know, it's probably fair to say that any Greek city-state that borders another Greek city-state probably had conflict in this period or before this period. So we'll see what I can come up with the mission trees. I'm very, very far away from doing all the mission tree stuff, and that's going to take such a long time. So I may have to figure out how to have really interesting possible alt history directions to go in for many of these nations. I don't want to get too lost in the sauce and start coming up with, like multiple mission trees for every single tag on the map, because that's going to get way too crazy for the scope of this project. I'm trying really hard to limit my own excitement and my own enthusiasm for lots of really interesting scenarios, because that's a lot of work. And when you're dealing with so many tags, the work becomes exponential if you're demanding for yourself. Every single tag gets its own custom mission tree. I'm thinking sort of like with the Boeotians, the Arcadian miners may have like a shared Arcadian city-state mission tree, with Orchomenos, Mantinea, and Tegea perhaps having their own custom mission trees on top of that, because we know more about them and they're more influential in this period. But ultimately, the main thing about the Arcadia region is this is very much a source of reliable allied manpower for the Peloponnesian League. All of these guys are landlocked, so they're not providing any naval power at all, but they're all providing some small amounts, but still consistent numbers of soldiers that are pretty loyal to the Lacedaemons. So if you're playing as Lacedaemon, or whoever becomes the hegemon of the Peloponnesian League, look to the Arcadians as a fairly staunch and reliable part of your ally list, compared to stronger and more sort of loyalty questionable nations like Elis, who has a lot of power level and may be okay with breaking free, or nations that might join like Argos, who might be of questionable loyalty, or Lamia, or nations like Thebae, who although staunchly anti-Adyni, if they form their Boeotian state, may get too confident and leave the league to just kind of do their own thing, and they're kind of far away from you, so they're kind of hard to control. The Arcadians are right next door to Lacedaemon, so they're easy to reach, they're easy to make use of their resources, and they're very pro-Lacedaemon. Not so much like with the Boeotians because they're anti-Adyni, but because they just are in the influence of Lacedaemon, and they have been for a long time. So their sort of motives for being in the league in the way that they are isn't so much geopolitical as it is kind of more cultural, right? They don't really care as much about Adyni probably, but they are definitely interested in having good relations with Lacedaemon. So if keeping Lacedaemon from invading Arcadia and killing them all means going to war in Attica, they're going to do it, right? That's just the way that Arcadia is at this stage. So that's basically what's going on with the Arcadia region, and also what I've said already about the system level changes that I'm doing for the project. So I'm very interested to hear everyone's thoughts on both these things, really on all these things. Please let me know in the comments, especially what you think about the system level changes I've made to zoom level and the display of different UI elements. I'm open to reversing these changes. I do know how to reverse them, And if people just don't think this is a good idea or don't really understand why I've done this, I'm happy to also have a discussion in the comments or on my Discord, linked in the description down below for the project. But that's basically it for this dev diary. It turned out this was not a shorter dev diary as I said that it would be. I never should ever assume that anything I do will be shorter than anything else I do. I just always find a way to talk for so much time about everything. But this is all information that I wanted to share. And as I've said before, one of my main goals with the project and with the process of making this mod is transparency and having everyone interested in the project have a lot of updates on what's been going on and kind of where things are with the project. As Greece is really starting to take its shape, I'm feeling very happy with the way this mod is looking so far, but there's a lot more work to do. And even once I get the map of Greece organized, that's only the very first step in a massive marathon of steps in order to get this thing ready even for alpha and playtesting. As I then have to go through and adjust all the cultures. There's some other things I want to do as well, like taking advantage, I'll actually unpause the game for a second, taking advantage of the unique ship designs from the Greek DLC, and finding a way to perhaps even use those for every nation so that the icons might be displayed. I don't know if this is a dynamic thing or if it's using just a preset model. Probably it's using a preset model, but as you can see, other Greek nations have a more generic trireme design. I'll figure out exactly what I can do with that, but that may be getting beyond the scope of what I can even pull off at this stage. But I'll continue trying to improve my modding abilities and continue updating you all on that as I do with these dev diaries. So, having said all that, thank you all so much for watching the 6th dev diary, and I'll see you all next time.